So if you have questions, you can call or yell me out. Yell me out of my hole.
I haven't even started yet, so.
Well, Kari, George is in here now and it's 10:01, so I'm not sure if we want to get started or if we now that George is here and obviously the most important person.
You feed his ego, Matt, and then we have to live with it.
But I don't.
That's less of us. That's true. We do. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll share my screen.
Well, this is Kari,
Okay.
but they were talking about,
I don't think she'll do the presenting.
yeah, they were talking about George or somebody.
Yeah, he's the one that came out and did the audit.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I can put some
Can-
faces.
Can everybody see my screen? It's the NebraskaTransit.com website.
I'm not seeing it yet, Kari. I don't know why not. If somebody else can see it, shout out. There, now I'm going to get a shared screen. Now I got
Okay.
the website.
Okay, good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Just a couple of things to get started. This session is being recorded and it will be posted so you can reference it at a later date if you need to. We'd like everyone to put their name and agency in the chat box so we know who attended. And also, if you can make sure that you are muted, we would very much appreciate that. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, I want to point out to you that we do have resources on our NebraskaTransit.com website. And it's a little different this funding cycle because we have put those resources, if you can see at the top of the website, funding and applications. And if I could get my cursor over there, there it is. Okay. So under funding and applications, click there. And you will see 5311 Rural Public Transportation Application current subrecipients. So you are all current subrecipients. So click the down arrow and you will see templates, for example, for a public notice and a public hearing notice, a sample of a resolution from your governing body, the labor narrative, which has to do with the Exhibit A document that you have to complete, and the certification of equivalent service narrative that you will have to complete if you have a non-ADA accessible vehicle in your fleet, and a checklist. Now, the fiscal year 21-22 Exhibit A, of course, will be updated to a fiscal year 22-23 Exhibit A, and that contains things like your compliance with civil rights, your certifications on lobbying, the labor narrative, where we have a sample language for you, and certifications and assurances, and all of this information. Some of you that have completed the application process before are familiar with Exhibit A, but it does need to get updated, and then we will post that updated document under those resources. So to get started with your application, you will log in to your dashboard. However you log into your dashboard, whether you log in through the homepage at NebraskaTransit.com or, okay, and now you see your dashboard. So you come over here under New Applications, and you will see Operating Assistance. So click on Operating Assistance, and you'll see a box that says, are you really sure that you want to create an operating assistance application for grant years 2023 to 2025. And you do. So you will click OK. And here is what the application looks like. Okay, so on worksheet 1, what we want is your basic information, the sponsor, the applicant name, and the project name. Now, the sponsor and applicant name and the project name might be the same and it might not. For example, the applicant name, the sponsor might be Stratton Industrial Commission, but the project would be Hitch and Hay Public Transit. So you might have 2 different entry types here. The DUNS number is obsolete. It has been replaced with a unique entity identifier, or UEI. If you don't know if you have a UEI or if it's updated and active, please get with someone in your fiscal department, in your fiscal area, because they will likely be the ones to be the keeper of the UEI. And you should do that as soon as possible, because it can take days, if not weeks, to get a UEI or update it. So you need to start on that immediately, again, if you don't have one. Now, the UEI is 12 characters, and this field will accept 12 characters, not 10, but 12. So make sure that you have that 12 character UEI ready to go. Then we want to know if you're a private, not-for-profit, or a public entity. You might be a county or a city, or you might be a community action agency. We want your complete name and address. The individual completing the application, their title and contact information. And then we will ask, is there a subcontractor who will provide and manage the operations? The vast majority of you will say no. But if you do subcontract with another agency to provide that service and you click yes, then we want to know more about that subcontractor. Okay. Are there any questions about this? And then you would save the worksheet after you got all that information entered. Are there any questions about worksheet 1? Okay, then we will move on to worksheet 2. Now we want to know if your information is up to date. So we ask you, as a reminder to you, do you need to update your service information, your contact information, your address? Some of you have moved offices in the past year or 2, so that information may need to be updated. We provide you here with a link to the transit directory. If you want to check what the transit directory currently says, it's also linked here. And if you want to update the information, you need to update the information, you can actually come over here to transit info. Click here, find your agency, and update that information. So now we want to know about the demographics.
Kari, can I ask a quick question on that, please? I'm sorry to interrupt. What if we know we're going to be moving in the upcoming year, but we don't know when that's going to occur exactly?
You can update that information at any time.
Okay.
You don't have to do it. You don't have
right.
to do it now if it's something in the future. So you can update anytime.
All right. Thank you for
Okay.
the interruption.
Okay.
My
Sure.
apologies.
Sure, no problem. So now we want to know the demographics of your service area. And we provide you with a link to the US Census so you can find your service area and you can find out the percentage of all of these demographic types in your area. When you're finished entering all of this information, this total should equal 100%. Now we ask about incidental use of the vehicle. So we know that incidental use of the vehicle is allowable under certain circumstances. So if you say no, that's fine. But if you say yes, we want some more information. And this is a change that we made based on the suggestion of our federal reviewers earlier this year. They were not happy with the fact that we did not have you basically certify how you manage incidental use of the vehicle. So you have to tell us that if you use the vehicle for something other than transporting the public, that does not result in the reduction or interruption of public transit service. And we also want to know that the cost attributable to the incidental service is paid by another program. So if you click yes here, this is going to expand, and you're going to have to put your name and your title here and save the worksheet. Any questions about this worksheet? Okay, moving on to worksheet 3. So this is your vehicle fleet, and it will auto-populate. And the only thing that we really need you to do on this worksheet is rate the condition of the vehicle. Now, I have had questions in the past about how you're supposed to rate the condition of your vehicle. How are you qualified to look at a vehicle and tell us whether it's in very good or good condition? What's the difference between very good and good condition? In our state asset management plan, we follow the Kelly Blue Book guidance for how to rate vehicle condition. So, and I sent that out, but it's been several years ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that information posted on nebraskatransit.com. So you have some guidance about how to complete this page. So you notice that in this column, there's a non-ADA accessible vehicle. No wheelchair positions, no lift. So after you get done rating your vehicles and you click on Save Worksheet, whoop, the database says you have a non-ADA accessible vehicle. Now we want you to provide us with a certification of equivalent service. This is a federal requirement, because we need to make sure that even though you have that vehicle with no wheelchair positions and no lifts, that you can still provide adequate service for the population in your service area that does need a wheelchair lift or a ramp. So you will complete the name of the agency, and then you will have an individual. This could be the transit manager, and the title and the date that you completed this form. And then you come down here and there's a narrative, a brief narrative, which basically we just want to know what population are you serving? Approximately how many ambulatory and non-ambulatory people do you provide service for? And again, there is a sample narrative on the website at nebraskatransit.com. So you have some guidance for how to complete this, this brief narrative. And here's the federal regulations for non-discrimination. We provide that to you. And then you click Submit. Now, if you came up here, or if you clicked Save Worksheet, you didn't click Submit. So you're not going to be able to save this worksheet until you complete this form and hit Submit. You're not going to be able to save it, I should say. Okay.
Kari,
Yes.
this is Kurt. I do have a question. We had talked previously about when we rate the condition of the vehicle, because this is based on a 2-year agreement, and in 2 years, the condition of that vehicle can change significantly. Any change as far as being able to change these, after that first year of the agreement, or should we still kind of look at where we think that vehicle will be in 2 years, so it meets the guidelines for replacement?
I would rate the vehicle as it is at the time of the application, and if you want to replace it and the condition has changed, we'll look at it when you submit your vehicle application.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions about worksheet 3? Okay. Moving on to worksheet 4. Now we want to start the budget process. So this is your operating budget. This is driver, dispatchers, and fuel and oil. The only other operating personnel you might have is if you had a maintenance person on staff, but I don't know of any agency that does at this time. So we want to know the salary. And again, this is for a 2-year period. So make sure that you're plugging in numbers here for 2 years, not 1 year. We had a lot, the last round, we had a lot of agencies that I think just put in a 1-year budget. And we're having to write a lot of supplemental agreements. So keep in mind that this is for a 2-year period. And we want to know the salaries for these individuals and the employer costs. The employer costs are things like health insurance, life insurance, FICA, things like that. So after you completed all of this information, you would save the worksheet. Any questions about worksheet 4? It's pretty self-explanatory. Worksheet 5, the non-operating budget. So this is all of your other expenses. Building maintenance, vehicle maintenance, insurance, marketing, office supplies, everything else plugs in here. Admin staff, the transit manager and other admin staff plugs in here. Any questions about this worksheet? We do allow for other non-operating expenses if there's something that we've missed in this list and you have other non-operating expenses, we have a line. We'll talk about the indirect cost rate on the last worksheet. It will not apply to the vast majority of you. Any questions about this worksheet?
Do you want us to include our software expenses under other?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we should have added that, but yeah, and that would go under other. Okay, worksheet 6. We want to know what your project income is going to be. So we want to know what you estimate your fares, again, for 2 years. What do you estimate your fares might be? And if you have a contract with the school or the hospital or some other entity, we want to know that amount and who you're contracting with. Who is it that you're contracting with? And the amount. And if 3 rows isn't enough, you have the opportunity to add 10 rows. And add 10 more rows. Okay. And then you would save this worksheet. Any questions about worksheet 6? Worksheet 7. We want to know where your local match is coming from. Might come from the city, might come from the county, might come from the hospital, might come from United Way, or it might come from your agency. So we want to know where your local match is coming from and the amount of that local match. And I will show you a trick on how to figure how much local match that you need to plug in here. And again, you can add 10 rows if you need to. This is what would be where you would plug in your Medicaid trips, your Title 20 trips, if you use that as local match and not as revenue.
Can you elaborate on local match?
So local match is the non-federal share of the project. So for example, for non-operating expenses, we are allowed to reimburse your expenses for non-operating at 80%. We have state funds that we can use to match that federal money at 10%, but you will be required to provide a 10% local match for non-operating. Okay. For operating expenses, it's 50, 25, 25.
So if we pay more salaries we can include employees' salaries as part of our match?
No, you would report salaries would go under either operating or non-operating as an expense. That's salaries is not a local match. Unless you had it, yeah, it's not a local match.
How do you handle in-kind services?
So in-kind services, could go here. I mean, we have it here. It probably would be best on worksheet 7 as in-kind. So you would just list what your in-kind service is. Like maybe somebody comes and mows your property for free. So you would plug that service in here and then the amount. And then you would have to upload documentation that supports that amount. You can't just make up a, it's $5,000 to mow our lawn every year, and that's what we're claiming for local match. We need documentation to support your in-kind contribution. If you might have a building that the city allows you to use to store your vehicles. So we would want to know the square footage of that building and what the value would be to rent that building if you had to pay rent.
But could local match be also, for example, we are a healthcare facility and then the transportation department is part of a department of the healthcare system. We are not claiming back on the other page salaries for the payroll department, for the CFO that might oversee different things. So that would be part of our in local match would be those salary, you know what I'm saying? And how would we prove that?
I do. So that would not be in kind. That would be, we consider that to be part of your cost allocation. So if you, well, we would prefer you to have a cost allocation plan and to submit that with your monthly invoice. That's how typically most agencies do it. They don't claim it as an in-kind match. If, as you described, you had somebody in the accounting department and they, worked, 10% of their time, or 20 hours a week, I should say, not a percentage of time, but 20 hours a week on transit, then you should claim that on your monthly invoices reimbursement, and you should submit to us a cost allocation plan to support that.
So you wouldn't show it on the application?
You would, if you had an accounting person that worked 10 or 20 hours a week on your on transit, then you would claim that as your administrative salary, as an administrative salary. And it would be part of your budget on the non-operating as an admin staff person.
Kari, could we take this just a little bit of clarification? Like, let's see if we have volunteers. How would you like, we use an actual in-kind form for items that are donated each month. How would you like us, and I realize that this is the funding application, but even on a monthly invoice, just so that I kind of have this full circle, is like, let's say that we have volunteers that donate their time. Maybe it's board members, maybe it's somebody coming in to answer the phones, maybe it's a group of kids that wash our vehicles. How would you like that documented? Would you like just an in-kind form that they sign off on?
An in-kind form that they sign off on, and also how are you justifying the dollar amount that you're claiming as in-kind? Now, there used to be, and I'm not sure if it's still available, but there used to be the Points of Light Foundation.
Yes.
Where you could go and you could get like a typical hourly wage for somebody that, again, comes to mow your lawn for free, or who comes to answer your phones for free and is donating that time. So you would use that documentation to back up your claim.
Okay,
and submit that with your monthly invoice.
and would you like that also for like on the application process as a supporting document?
Yes, yes, that's a supporting document that we have to have, your justification for what you're claiming as in kind.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your questions? I hope. Need
Thank
any
you
more
so much.
clarification?
I'm sorry, I'm still lost on this local match. What do we count as the local match? And what sources do we have to prove the local match?
Well, for example, if you are, some entities are self-funded. So for example, Callaway Hospital funds all of their local match. So they would put Callaway Hospital here and whatever local match is required here. And they would be done. You might have local match from the city or the county or another agency. It's the non-federal share that you are required to provide to match the federal and state funding. Does that further clarify it or further confuse you? For example, Ride Transit in Kearney, every 2 years, they service multiple counties, I think 7 counties. So every 2 years, they go to each county and they say, if you want us to provide this service in your county, you're going to have to give us local match. And we need X number of dollars in local match to provide the same level of service that we have provided in previous years. And if that county wants to continue to have service, then they have to agree. And they have to provide RIDE with documentation, typically in the form of a resolution, that they approve that local match. And then we want that document uploaded with the application, so we know that you have adequately secured that local match from another entity or from the county or the city. Does that do anything to clarify your question?
Kari, this
Are we
is
muted?
David. I'm kind of set up the same way healthcare facility
What if we could do it?
this individual is.
From
And when
that.
we fill out the reimbursement, the invoice, we get all the way to the end and online.
I showed it to you. That was when we first started. Yeah,
So is it unfair? I mean, would it be a fair assessment to say, so you fill out your invoice on how the expenses and your revenue goes for the month. You get to the end of that invoice and line 31 is supposed to be the local match that you need to come up with. So since you've agreed to that, or we're city run, so this, this city doesn't necessarily write the check that's needed. However, as part of the healthcare facility, regardless of where the funds come from, that's the match that you're agreeing to. So that line 31 is what your local match needs to be. And then you just need to, rather it be a form, rather it be a resolution, whatever, to prove that you're coming up with that part of it that's sufficient, no?
why did they tell me?
I think what you just described is sufficient, but you're referring more to your monthly invoice, correct?
Correct. And I mean, that helps you come up with that local match. If you're trying to determine what exactly is it, at the invoice of line 31 is the number I use to go back on the monthly invoice and put in there, here's the local match. But sometimes there's not money that necessarily changes hands. We're owned by the city, so therefore we are putting forth that money. We're just coming up with a form that states that this is what it is. It's not necessarily that's being written.
Right, and that is a problem that we run into because there is no paper trail, but we need some kind of a paper trail. But that's kind of an invoice issue. that we're working on, and that I know we've worked with you on
Yeah,
to try and find that paper trail between the city and the transit service. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything complicated. It could be an email
okay.
verifying that the city provided X number of dollars in local match. So,
This is Scott. For my July invoice, you guys have still not approved it. I actually submitted the canceled checks proving that the money cleared the bank for my local match for the current fiscal year. And I'm still being told that that's not sufficient. Why would that not be documentation?
I would have to talk to Val and Linda about what that issue is. I'm not familiar with your July invoice. So I'll follow up with them about where they're at.
Carrie,
Uh-huh.
we have one from chat. I do meal delivery through the aging office. Can we claim that as a local match?
No, that is incidental use of the vehicle. And you would use that money to pay for that service. That would be money that would be, because you can't pay for that incidental use from the 5311 program. And you can't claim it as local match. It's an expense that offsets the use of that federally funded vehicle to provide incidental use.
And Carrie, you have to claim that those funds as revenue when received, correct?
For incidental use of the vehicle,
Yes.
we have, several years ago, we got away from asking you to report those dollars because it seemed to further confuse everybody. So that's incidental use. It is completely separate from the 5311 program. So don't report it to us, keep it separate, but we may want to look at it if we come out for a site visit. If you're providing that incidental use, we will probably ask you for documentation of how that program is paid for. But don't muddy the waters by putting it on your invoice.
But if you do receive funding for like meal delivery, then those funds are just yours to keep.
Yes, and they're yours so that you can prove that you have another source of revenue to provide that service.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about local match? I appreciate the fact that it can be very confusing. So. Okay. So now we're at the last worksheet. And this is where you want to tell us who this application is authorized by. Might be the transit manager. Typically, it would be the individual in charge of your governing body. Might be your mayor, might be your board chair, and the date. And this is where you would save your worksheet. So now we're going to save the worksheet. Oh, we got an error message. It says, please fill all required fields. So this is something different this grant cycle. So we have provided this checklist in previous grant applications, but it was not, it was a tool and it was not required that you click that either that you uploaded or NA if it doesn't apply to you for each of these required documents. And we made it required this year because last grant cycle, by far, the most common error that people made was to not upload all of the documents that we needed, and we rejected scores of applications. So this year, we made this mandatory. So you're all going to need a resolution from your governing body supporting the application and committing local match if you're supplying local match. If you have other sources of local match, like the county or the city, we're going to want to see that documentation of commitment. You will all publish a public notice telling the public that you are applying for state and federal funds. And again, there's a template or an example of that public notice on nebraskatransit.com. If you're making substantial changes to your service, you should have a public hearing. So if you needed a public hearing, we'll want to see those, the fact that you have published that as a public hearing and the minutes from the meeting. We want a copy of the affidavit from the newspaper for the publication of the notice. We want an org chart that tells us your relationship with the governing body. Doesn't have to be a complicated org chart. The certification for equivalent service, you know, whether or not you need, that's actually a part of the application. So indirect cost rate agreement, as I said, the vast majority of you will not have an indirect cost rate agreement. But if you do, if you are for example, a community action agency, you might have an indirect cost rate agreement and you might claim indirect costs on your invoices. So we're going to want to see a copy of that agreement. And if you're going to claim in-kind services, we need documentation for that. Most of you will not have either of these. And you will all have uploaded the Exhibit A. And then you will drop all of your files here. All of these files you will drop here, preferably in PDF. Okay. So now we'll save the worksheet. But it's still not going to let us get to the summary page because we haven't uploaded any files. Now, the database isn't smart enough to recognize all of these files and recognize that you submitted all of them. You might submit one PDF or you might submit individual PDFs, but it does recognize that you haven't uploaded anything. So it's going to require you to drop at least one document into the Dropbox. And you know that it's uploaded when you see that green check mark. You might have to wait, you know, a few seconds if it's a larger file. So I'm still not going to be able to get to the summary page because if you see all of these worksheets that have a triangle with an exclamation mark, that means that these worksheets aren't saved. So it's not going to let me get to the summary page until all of these worksheets are saved. Okay. But I am going to get to, any questions about that page?
We had one in chat. For number 1 on the resolution, does that need to be done each year?
No, they're providing local match for 2 years. That needs to be the commitment.
Kari, I have something that's a little unrelated, is because I know someone asked me in the past, is there like a working copy that people can like download, like a Word document or something that they can use as a working copy, you know, for like a draft before they submit it online?
The application?
Yes.
No, but if you want us to go through it with you page by page, we can.
No, I'm just thinking, you know, like, I know like my board of directors in the past, and what I did is I just made up like a Word document. You know, they wanted something that they could look at, we could sit down and review, do your calculations, you know, some of those things, kind of like a working draft copy before you actually input the information into our portals.
We don't have that now, but I'll add that to the list. And we'll see what we can do about that before, if that's something that we can get up and running in the next month or so, because your application is due March 31st.
Right.
So you're going to want to start working on this as soon as possible, and budgeting would be the first thing. I would think.
Absolutely. I
After
just-
the UEI,
Yeah.
your budget is going to be the most complicated.
It was just really helpful when we were doing it kind of old school, I think, to have that hard copy, you know, for like governing boards to look at, scribble on, make notes, those sort of things, or even like an Excel sheet, you know, that would help with calculations. So
So this is your summary page. This is a summary page from the last, the current grant cycle, actually. So I'm going to show you a trick about local match. So on worksheet 7, it wants you to calculate your local match and how much do you need? Well, after you get all of your dollars and cents, all of your numbers, all of your budgets, and you go to the summary page on line 14, it's going to tell you exactly how much local match you need to match the numbers that you have plugged in to the application. So now you could go back, return to your dashboard, and go back to worksheet 7 for local match. And you can make sure that you have an adequate amount of local match plugged into that page. Okay. Now you can also download the summary. You could do this, Johnny. You could download the summary and download the worksheets and take that to your board.
and that's what I've done just here of late. I just know they found it useful with kind of the old school, you know, being able to kind of line item things, I think, is what they liked. For each line item on here, they like breaking down the line items of our expenses, you know, like let's say administrative, what is our phone? What is this? What is that? You know, they just found it helpful. And I do it when I'm setting up our budget anyway. I just didn't know if there was something either at Nebraska Transit or if there would be something available that might be helpful for someone else too. So,
Well, I would imagine that most entities are using spreadsheets
something, yeah.
to track, you know, to develop and track their budgets. We
Yeah.
don't have a template.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so after you are satisfied with your application, then you would submit the application. And there is on our side, there's a 2-step process. The application first goes to Lucinda's dashboard, and she primarily is looking for your documentation. She's going to make sure that you have your resolution and the exhibit A, and then everything's signed. And if she finds that you don't have that information, then she'll reject it back to your dashboard. Once it is approved by Lucinda, it goes to June's dashboard, and June is more interested in the financial information that you have plugged in. So she'll look at the financial information, maybe compare it to your last grant cycle. Is it comparable? Is there a huge increase, a huge decrease? She might have some questions, or she might just approve it, and then it goes through the agreements process. Okay. So here's another tip. So we created a draft application for grant year 2023 to 2025. When you want to come back and work on this draft application, you find it on your dashboard and you click on it, and you can continue to work on it and save your worksheets. Do not go back here and click here again, because that is going to create another draft, but it's going to be for 2025 to 2027. You don't want to do that. You want to find your draft operating assistance application on your dashboard. Okay. Any questions about that process, or just any other questions in general?
Kari, this is Kurt. Working with the mobility management team on some possible projects for shelters, benches, and facility. Do you want us to try and build those costs into this operating agreement, or does that usually happen with a supplemental?
So any facility and vehicles, that's a capital procurement, and that is totally separate. This is just for operating assistance. You could plug in your what did you say, your shelters?
Yes.
Yeah, you could plug that in to your operating assistance application, but not any facility costs for a future facility. That will be a separate agreement.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
It's probably fairly similar, but just a question on, you talked a little bit about if you deliver meals, what if, as a healthcare facility, we use a van incidental for like taking labs to the hospital, that type of deal? Is that something we just keep off to the side? Do we put that on our transportation logs? If our driver's taking it, how is that supposed to be handled?
If you're not transporting the public, if you're transporting something for the hospital, that is incidental use, and you would not report it on your monthly invoice, and you would have the documentation in your files so that we can make sure that the cost to provide that incidental use is covered by probably the hospital.
But if it's for a community member or a resident of the facility that we're actually taking it to the hospital that we could use, so that would qualify then?
If you're transporting somebody to the hospital, from the nursing home to the hospital, that would be public transportation.
What if you're just taking lab for the nursing home to the hospital that involves a community member?
Did you say lab work?
Labs. Yeah, blood work. Yep.
That would be incidental use because you're not transporting the traveling public.
Okay.
You're transporting an item.
Okay.
Kari, this is Vicki McNeely, and we started within this grant cycle. I think it has been where, and this has kind of got me confused on what they're talking about this subject. So we are transporting Head Start children to and from school. Is that incidental or is that the public?
That's the public. Do you have a contract for that?
Okay. We do. It's an agreement with it's within our own organization. So we have an agreement with our Head Start program to be the transportation provider for them.
So those would be sponsored passenger boardings, first of all, and you could use that contract as local match.
Okay.
It's a human services contract. Like Medicaid
Okay.
and Title 20.
Okay, because that's what I wasn't sure where we would put that on this application because, yeah. So, and this doesn't affect me now that you explained it that way, but I'm confused on if you're doing incidental work or like if we did have an incidental and they paid us for that, you don't want to see it on the invoice, but where do those expenses go then? If you had the gas for the vehicle or the driver's time? I don't understand how that works.
Well, you would separate out the gas, and I know that can be difficult, but you would have to estimate the gas and the driver's salary, and you would not request reimbursement for those costs on your monthly invoice. Instead, you would have in file proof that another program paid for that service, and you wouldn't count miles or boardings or revenue hours for providing that service.
Okay, so as far as boardings with our Head Start children, we are currently counting those as boardings. Is that's correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
They're sponsored boardings. Because they're paid for by their fare is paid for by a third party, and you have a contract. So it's a sponsored boarding. But yes, you should count that as a boarding. Anything else?
Hey, Kari, Casey Canner here with City Transportation. I just started working with Motive Care. That won't go, sorry, excuse me, fares and contracts. That'll go under, if I want to use it as a local match source.
Yes.
Okay, so I just got started, so I don't know what I'm going to be making. So do I kind of just take a stab at it and hope I'm close, or what would you want me to put there?
Take a stab at it and that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Carrie, I'd like to just give a minute, but once we're done with questions on this, we do have an off-topic one that you might be able to guess.
Okay. Any other questions about the operating assistance application? Due March 31st. Okay,
Well,
you do have
as-
any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Probably Lucinda and I would be your best contacts. If you have questions. Okay,
The off-topic one is there any new information on bus delivery?
we are still working with the consultant for the Ford Transit. So no, there isn't any updated information. They stopped 2022 chassis quite some time ago. So they're working with the 2023 chassis. And we're negotiating with the manufacturers about timeframes, and the manufacturers don't want to commit to a time frame because they don't know how many chassis are going to be available. So they don't want to sign a contract that says, 120 days after they get the purchase order, they can deliver the vehicle, because they might not even have the chassis in that 120 days. So it's still all very much a supply chain issue. We did recently get some vans, quite a few vans and a few buses in, but those were ordered a year ago or over a year ago.
Carrie, would you be able to answer one more quick question? Updates on scheduling software as far as local match portions, if there is a requirement, is there a new RFP that went out? Any updates on the scheduling software or technology?
No, there's no new RFQ. The same software vendors that were approved several years ago are the same vendors. And right now we are still reimbursing that technology procurement at 100%, but I don't know how much longer we can continue to do that. So if you want some technology, you should probably make some decisions.
Thank you.
Another off-topic one, Carrie.
Okay.
I have a question on motive care. I believe I'm saying that correctly. How is that a local match, and would that be a sponsored fare?
You would not report it as both local match or a sponsored fare. It is local match because that is allowable per federal regulations. It's a human services transportation. So you can use that as local match. And that is what we strongly recommend that you do. You report it as local match to us. When I report it to the National Transit Database, I report it as a sponsored boarding and a sponsored fare. Organization paid fare is the terminology, but agencies should report that to us as local match, and then we sort it out on our end, what we report to the National Transit Database.
So Carrie, can you please clarify on our monthly invoices, you do or do not want us to count like motive care, health and human service trips as sponsored trips?
They're sponsored trips,
Okay,
but you would report the dollar amount that you got from providing those trips as local match.
thank you.
You would count the trips as sponsored trips, but the dollars as local match.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Mhm. Thank you.
Anything else? Not seeing anything, Matt?
That is correct. Oh,
Okay,
wait a minute, one more, sorry.
okay.
If the board, we got a couple more now. If the board decides to get out of the 5311 funding, how difficult is it to get back in?
It's not difficult as long as it's not difficult. I mean, as long as you're not duplicating, tremendously duplicating another service area. I mean, if you're a qualified provider and there's a need for service in that area, you would be approved. And for new applicants, we do accept applications if it's for new service, or again, for an area where the area is underserved, we accept applications at any time for operating assistance.
And then our other one was, so would our hospital contracts be a local match?
Your contract with the hospital to provide, yes, I would say yes. It's a human services.
That's all I have right now.
Okay. Going. Okay, thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thanks, Kari.
Thank you.
Carrie.